Welcome to the Power Factor Show. Episode 128. Sponsored by Rainier Ballistics, Hodgdon Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hi, welcome to Power Factor. I'm Larry.
I'm Rick.
And we're going to kick off this week with a little bit of unfinished business. We've got a trivia question that needs to be answered, and this was back on episode 124 when we had Lisa Munson in here. And the question was, who besides Lisa and Kay and Debbie Ferns were the lead instructors, or who were the secondary instructors to the Babes of Bullets camps? And there were several answers, but we asked you to name three, which was designed to drive some traffic to the website and get them some exposure, of course. And
sure.
And we asked that you bring your girlfriends and wives to watch the show. And we had a special trivia rule that week, which was any of the ladies that entered the trivia question would get 2 entries for a better chance to win.
Now, doesn't that assume that the ladies don't know the answers, so that's why they need 2 tries at it?
No.
Seems kind of sexist.
Encourage ladies to watch the show and participate. So,
all right.
And we want to, get the ladies interested in Babes of Bullets. So,
right.
The answers that you could come up with, for example, I've got a few written down here: Sheila Bray, Sheila Hoekstra, Maggie Reese, Deb Keyhart. There are others like Lena Michalik, and several others out there that help instruct with Babes of Bullets. And so we had a few women enter, and Dee Dee Watts was our winner.
Gabba gabba hey, Dee Dee.
So we are giving away 500 bullets to Rainier Ballistics. You get a certificate. Pick out anything of your choice. So,
sweet.
Congratulations. Thanks for playing.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about this week, Rick?
We are going to talk a little bit about IDPA Reloads.
Yeah.
And we covered the mechanics of it very early, I think in the first 10 episodes probably. And we've discussed reloads, but I think it's when I was doing the last Vicker scoring episode, I made mention of just how long it takes to perform IDPA reloads. And I didn't really elaborate too much, except to the extent that I think a lot of people have this sense that a slide lock reload isn't really much different from a speed reload like you do in USPSA. You have to get the loaded mag in the gun, rack the slide to get around in the chamber, but it's kind of a bang bang kind of a thing. You should be able to execute it pretty quickly. And I think there's this sense that if you watch videos, say, of master class shooters, people who are winning major matches, you might think to yourself, slide lock reload looks like, it takes about 2 seconds, and then because you have to do some additional manipulating on the retention reloads, maybe a retention reload, maybe it's 3 or 4 seconds,
sure.
And maybe a reload with retention compared to the tactical reload, since you have to go to your belt twice on the tactical
right.
reload, that's going to be a little bit slower. Maybe it's going to be 4 seconds. And I think there's just this sense that the reloads are pretty quick. And I made mention of the fact that we'd run a stage at one of our matches some years ago that was strictly to measure reloading times. And the stage was just a single 7-yard target. The first string start with a single round in the chamber, so that after you fired the first round, you're at slide lock. So it's just draw, fire, slide lock, reload, fire. So it's just shot to shot, with nothing involved other than just getting the gun reloaded as quickly as possible. And so we had about 90 plus shooters at our last match. We ran the stage. I did some analysis of the numbers. I didn't want to get too into it. I mean, I was thinking, like somebody asked, how much difference is there between an SSP sharpshooter and a CDP sharpshooter? Wondering if there's a difference in reloading time based on say trying to get a single stack mag into a single stack gun versus a high cap, and just some things like that. And I didn't go into it to that extent. What I was really just trying to do was get as big a sample as possible, so I came up with some real averages, that actually are kind of real world examples of how long the different reloads take. Now, up until this very day, IDPA has had 3 approved reloads.
Right.
And the 3 reloads that are in the rule book are the emergency or slide lock reload, which is the reload that you do when the gun is empty. The mag has no rounds in it. The chamber has no round in it. There's no requirement within the rules that the slide physically lock back, but they call it the slide lock reload because you're reloading a gun that's completely empty. Then there's the 2 retention reloads, which are the reload with retention and the tactical reload. Now the reload with retention or the tac load are interchangeable. Now that's one of the things that's driving the new rule book, the draft rule book, which is out now. Here we are towards the end of May 2013. The draft rule book has been out for a few weeks. People are kind of digesting what's in the new rule book. And one of the things that's in there is they've removed the references to the 3 approved reloads, and now it's just 2 approved reloads, and it's the slide lock or emergency reload, and then what they call the tactical reload, which now kind of combines the reload with retention and the tac load, which were 2 of the 3 previous approved reloads have now been combined. And the reason to combine them, in essence, is that initially, when the first rule books were written 15 years ago, the 3 reloads were considered distinct enough that you could, for instance, have a course of fire that specified do this reload. You know, so like on the classifier today, kind of the only last vestiges of that are the classifier will say perform a tactical reload and then re-engage, yada yada yada. And even though the phrase perform a tactical reload is what's in the instructions for the course of fire, because the tactical reload and the reload with retention are interchangeable, you can actually do either one.
Right. Okay.
And so what that turned into over the years has been this blurring of these 2 specific reloads with detailed descriptions of how each one is carried out in the rule book, to just streamlining that and saying a retention reload, or what's now called the tactical reload, is complete when you've got your fully loaded mag that you've pulled out of your approved storage device, loaded into the gun, and the partial or empty magazine that came out of the gun is properly stowed. And actually, the stowing part is not part of the technical requirements for completing the reload. You can't shoot your gun until it's loaded and the mag is stowed.
But you can leave cover.
But you can leave cover when the gun is loaded.
Once the gun's reloaded.
So if you're doing a tactical reload where you've pulled the magazine from your belt first, exchanged the 2 mags at the gun, now the gun is reloaded, even though you've now got the depleted or empty magazine that came out of the gun in your other hand. You can't shoot with it in your hand,
but you can start moving. And really the only time I think I can remember ever getting that benefit is on the classifier. Right.
On string 2 of stage 3, you fire 2 rounds at each target from the barricade. You perform the reload and then move up to the barrel.
Yeah.
And so if you've done a reload with retention, the whole reload is done behind the wall, then you advance to the barrel. If you're doing the tac load, you can do the exchange at the gun, and then as soon as the loaded mag is in the gun, you can go. So you've got, 15 feet, I think, to move from the barricade to the barrel. And if you want to be stowing that mag while you're moving, that's legal. You can't fire a shot until you've got it stowed. But just that's a single incident, a single situation where a tactical reload might be advantageous, even though if you're doing it strictly as a reloading drill like we did, the shot-to-shot speed is slower. Now, I mentioned that I think there's a little bit of a misconception on most people's part, I think, about just how long these different reloads take. And so what I did was I crunched some numbers from the 90-odd shooters that we had at our match, and this is across all divisions and all classifications. Like I said, I just wanted as large of a sample as possible. I took the top 10, that is the 10 facets overall, regardless of class or division, and then averaged the top 10 performances. There were some weird anomalous kind of things, like, for instance, the slowest reload was almost a minute. And I didn't want to include that in the numbers, even as an overall average, because it gives you a misconception of what an actual, what it really takes. So I did what I called a little bit of smoothing and whatnot of the numbers, because I wanted
just get rid of the outliers.
I want them to be representative. So the top 10 performances on the slide lock reload averaged was 4.2 seconds. So realistically, if you're going to, and of course we're not dealing with reloading on your knees, we're not reloading prone, we're not, this is
standing,
just standing facing the target with no barricade or anything.
With a wide open target
at 7 yards. So this really is almost like an ideal situation, 4.2 seconds.
Wow.
Now, if we look at the what I call the middle 10, when I printed out the results, I probably had like the top 40 shooters on one page, then the next 40 shooters on the second page, and then the remainder on the third page. So I just took the top 10 from the second page, and that would kind of take this vast middle ground of marksmen and sharpshooters. They're not the fastest and best performing shooters, but it's more typical of what the average shooter might actually expect. And so this middle 10, which again, we're probably, in terms of the overall standings, probably around between shooter 40th place and 50th place out of 99 or whatever there was. The average for that group is 6.1 seconds. So that's 2 seconds. Wow. It's 50% slower.
For a slide lock.
For a slide lock reload. And so if you're thinking to yourself things like, well, let's see, I'm going to make up, I got a miss or a down 3, and I'm going to make that shot up. Well, your score on the target, you're trading, let's say, a -3 for a -0, which is a second and a half. But if you now have to do a reload,
that with 4 or 5 or 6 seconds.
Yeah, for a 5 or 6 second reload.
For an extra reload, yeah.
So when I'm shooting a course of fire, especially if the minimum number of rounds is exactly the same number as I have in my gun, I go into that stage and I say, I am not going to reload. I don't care if I have a miss. Sure. I am not going to reload, because that reload is going to take 4 seconds, and even a miss is 2.5 seconds. So there's no way, unless you really are piling up penalties like a miss, a failure to neutralize, and a non-threat or something like that, there's going to be no benefit to doing a reload that's been forced by trying to make up points that you've tried to accumulate elsewhere. And to go back to the Vickers scoring stage or episode that we did a couple of weeks back, you're always trying to balance what you're going to get versus what it's just going to cost. Sure. So anytime you're shooting a course of fire where taking an extra shot might mean having to do a reload or will mean having a reload, you really are not going to get much benefit from executing a 6-second reload in order to save a second and a half on the target.
Sure. Yeah.
So just be mindful of what you're getting and what it's costing. Now, if it's course of fire where you're going to reload anyway, let's say you're shooting in CDP and it's a 17-round course of fire, you got 9 rounds in the gun, 8 rounds on the belt. You're going to have to do 1 reload, but now again you're in a situation where if you take an extra shot, you're going to have to do a second reload. Sure. And so just be mindful of how many rounds there are on the course of fire, where those reloads are going to fall, and if you take an extra shot, or God forbid you take 2 extra shots, and you're going to have to do a reload, it's going to be very difficult for any of those shots that you took to make up for the time you're going to spend doing that reload. It's going to cost you doing the reload, yeah. And that's the fastest reload. Those are the fastest reloads, yeah. Now when you get into the tack load and the reload with retention, again, the reload with retention is going to be a little bit quicker because you've already got both hands on the gun. Mm-hmm. You take the mag, put it in the pocket, get the second mag and put it in the gun. So you just go down once and come back up once. 1 round trip to the belt. Right. Yeah. And so the reload with retention is the second fastest reload. The top 10 average was 5.27 seconds, so just about a second slower than the slide lock reload, which when you think about it, it's the time it takes you. You're slowed down a little bit by having to stow this mag, and then come back up to the gun. So the act of stowing the mag, but then you don't have to rechamber that round. There's already a round in the gun, so so it winds up being about a second slower. Yeah. So now if we go to the middle 10, again, now the top of the second page, those shooters that are in about the 50th place in the middle of the pack in terms of the overall standings, their reload with retention average time was 7.6 seconds. So that's almost a second. More than 2 seconds slower than the top 10. So again, it's something that's a little more manipulations, a little more dexterity, and the people who are practicing it are doing pretty well, only a second slower than their slide lock reload. But at the middle 10, it's a drop now to about 1.5 seconds now, the time it takes to find the place to stow that mag. Now the tack load, which is of course the one where the reload mag is drawn first, brought up to the gun, you do the exchange. Because we're timing shot to shot, the whole process is on the clock.
Right.
Unlike the example I gave in the classifier, where the that move that you make from the barricade to the barrel is essentially free time. You can't shoot while you're moving, so you might as well be stowing that mag. So in that case, assuming you've mastered both reloads to the same extent, you could probably theoretically do the tack load a little more quickly. Just because you're able to leave cover the minute the mag's in the gun.
You have those concurrent activities of running while stowing.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we're just looking at strictly in terms of shot to shot under kind of ideal conditions, again, the tactical reload for the top 10 shooters at the match was 5.98 seconds. So it's more than 0.5 second slower than the tactical. Yeah. And so really, if you want to, if you really want to think to yourself, what are the realistic reloading times? Your slide lock reload's about 4 seconds. Your reload with retention is about 5 seconds, and your tack load is about 6 seconds. I mean, that's really where it falls out.
And that's probably if you are a sharpshooter.
That's an expert. We actually
expert level. Okay.
I don't know that we had any masters at this match, but I don't know. If we had 1 or 2, that's not a representative group anyway.
So my numbers are in that average.
Very possibly.
They probably are.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then back to the middle 10, our numbers, instead of being 4, 5, and 6 seconds, are 6 seconds, 7.5 seconds, and almost 9 seconds. So if you're, again, a marksman class shooter and you're trying to fire a couple of makeup shots because you think you got a -3 or a mic, and it causes you then to have to do a 9-second reload later, you better have done a whole lot of missing and screwing up if you think you're going to fix it with a 9-second reload.
Now, what about a miss? So you get 2.5 seconds and a fail to neutralize.
That'd be 7.5 seconds.
7.5 seconds. So you're still. And
then after you do your reload, you still have to get a good hit. What if you spend 9 seconds doing a reload and get another miss?
Right.
Yeah.
So
now we're
this
looking
assumes that your makeup shot is in the down zero.
Exactly. And so again, just be aware of how long these things really take. And then at the same time, think to yourself, okay, even if I don't do anything about my shooting, if I just practice my reloads, if I'm going to do a tack load, I can cut almost 3 seconds off. If I'm doing a slide lock reload, I should easily be able to cut 2 seconds off, drop it from 6 seconds to 4 seconds, and now of course a fire that used to take you 12 seconds to shoot takes you 10 seconds to shoot it now without having to be a better shooter.
Right.
I mean, all you're doing is just eliminating the time that you're wasting on the reload.
Wasted movement. And it's all about getting familiar with your gear and practicing that motion.
Yeah. So. Now one of the things about this test is that because the tack load and the reload with retention are now rolled into each other to the extent that if you're familiar with the current 2005 rule book, you'll look in there and it gives doesn't just name each of these 3 reloads, it gives you very specific instructions of how they're going to be conducted. So for instance, if you're doing the slide lock reload, the reload, which must be done behind cover if cover is available, the initial move on the slide lock reload is generally going to be hitting the mag release button, because you must initiate the reload by pulling the mag from the gun as your first step. So once you hit that button as your first move, the reload has now been initiated. But previously, I always had this sense that once I've sort of declared which reload I'm going to do by my first move, if my first move is to hit the mag release, well, the rule book says I have to do this, 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 and this to complete the reload with the retention that I've essentially announced I'm going to do by hitting the mag release button. Now, if the first move that I make is to my belt to draw the mag out of the pouch, now my initial move is the drawing of the mag from the pouch, and I've essentially declared my intent to do a tactical reload, which means that once the mag's in the gun, as long as the spent mag is in hand, I can leave cover. And so now, when the new rule book takes effect in October, I think is what's being projected now, these two retention reloads are not just interchangeable, but they're almost made kind of unrecognizable because there's no longer a specified sequence of events. It's not like, First, you press the mag release button, then you put the magazine in your pocket, then you draw the mag off the belt. I mean, it was worded that way in the rule book, and the way the new rule book is going to be worded, barring any unforeseen edits and changes in it, is essentially it's a reload that's done when there's a round in the chamber, and the reload is considered complete when the mag is locked in the gun, and essentially that's it. And so the idea that what sequence of events take place between the initiation of the reload and the completion of the reload, that doesn't matter anymore. And over the years, it's kind of evolved that way anyway, that it's not like you've committed yourself to a certain course of action based on which step you do first. As long as you remember that when the gun is loaded, the reload is complete, but that if you've got that mag in your hand, you can't fire a round with the mag in your hand. You have to have it properly stowed before you can fire.
Right.
So just be aware that of the time penalty, essentially, if you're static, of putting that mag into the pocket as the last step, and how much quicker it is, a half a second to a second and a half quicker to do the reload with retention, strictly on shot-to-shot speed. That if you do have some kind of a situation like on the classifier where you can advance while stowing that mag, you might be able to get an advantage from it. Now, the problem with that is you rarely are able to do two things at once as efficiently as you can do either one of them in isolation. Yeah. And so if you're concentrating on doing nothing but taking the mag out of the gun and put it in your pocket, you should be pretty efficient at just doing that motion. You know where the mag's going to go. Some people stick it in their waistband. Some people go into the vest pocket. Some people into the pants pocket. But just that move from the gun to the pocket should be something that you can make it repeatable and consistent. Likewise, running from the barricade to the barrel is something that you should be able to maximize your ability to do that. How many steps does it take to get there? Where do I want to plant my knee or knees when I get to the barrel? And so if you're concentrating on putting the mag in the pocket and then concentrating on running to the barrel, in essence doing the reload with retention, you will very possibly find that your time is going to be more consistent than when you're fishing around trying to get that mag put away while you're running. Essentially, you're not able to pocket the mag or run as efficiently as you would be if you did one and then the other. And I used to practice only the tack load. That was the only one I practiced. And really the only reason was because I'd been told that on this stage of the classifier, I can put that magazine in my pocket while I'm running forward to the barrel. What I often found is that I would arrive at the barrel and I still wouldn't have that mag.
Fumbling the mag.
Yeah, exactly. And it used to be that you had, there was actually kind of a rule, the way the rule was written, it said as long as you made a genuine effort to put the mag in your pocket, even if you didn't, you were okay.
Really?
And so then you had the question of, well, what is a genuine effort? I mean, if the mag is below my belt when I let go of it, was that a genuine effort? Do I have to fumble it once or fumble it twice? So I think finally they
more subjectivity.
Yeah, so they just removed that and just said, okay, look, it's got to be in the pocket before you can fire a shot. So be aware of situations where you can possibly get an advantage from one reload over the other, but I would say that you're probably going to be better off mastering the reload with retention, which is faster shot to shot, just because, again, you've got one motion to the belt, back to the gun, and you're ready to go. By mastering that, you'll probably be better off than trying for this kind of imaginary advantage you get from being able to put the magazine in your pocket while you move. And one thing that's, after I'd convinced myself that the reload with retention was faster, both for me and for everybody else, I mean, I've got the numbers right here, they don't lie, I switched away from the reload, from the tack load, and went strictly to the reload with retention, believing that just being able to do it consistently and quickly all the time was better than kind of having, because the other thing, by trying to practice and memorize and master both, you can introduce this element of doubt.
Sure.
At the moment it's time to do the reload, which reload is it I'm supposed to do?
Right.
And I often call that like a IPSC moment, where as I'm reaching for the belt, I eject the mag onto the ground. And so that's one of those things where it used to be, I mean, 15 years ago, if somebody, as they reached for their belt, ejected the mag onto the ground, I'd give them a procedural penalty right there. Because if you look at the rule book, it says, well, hold it. You're supposed to take the mag out of the gun and put it in your pocket. There's nothing in here that says you're supposed to eject it onto the ground. So you have not performed the reload as it's described here in the book. Wow. But then part of this reloads are interchangeable thing also turned into, it doesn't matter what happens as long as you don't fire a shot before you've got the loaded mag in the gun and the spent mag in your pocket. And so this idea, again, that you've somehow committed yourself to this certain sequence of events because you've hit the mag release first, or that you're supposed to do a different sequence of events because you've reached for your mag first, that's kind of out the window. It's just more a matter now of you can do whichever you want. Get the gun loaded.
Get the mag stowed.
And actually, I think I've found myself now going back to the tack load instead of the reload with retention. And I think the reason is that I find it easier to resist the urge to press the mag release than I find it making the first move to the gun, because I think it's because I've shot so much USPSA, as soon as it's time to reload, this hand goes off the gun down to the belt.
Okay.
And so the idea of keeping both hands at the gun to initiate the reload, which you do with the reload with retention, that seems to me to be less natural. It's almost like I have time to think as I'm reaching for the belt. Okay, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to draw the mag from the belt and do the exchange at the gun. And so I think I screw up less if all of my reloads start this way. It's always a reach to the belt for the reload, regardless of what type of reload it is.
Well, I'm so new with IDPA still. I've only shot 3 matches. I'm still like, you know, at make ready. I'm rehearsing that in my mind. Okay, I'm planning a reload. It's a 12-round course. I have to reload. I'm gonna well, on a 12-round course, you know, most of the time you're gonna go to slide lock. But if I have a point where I'm going to do a reload with retention, I find programming my motions, I'm going to rip the mag out of the gun first, even though it's not natural from a USPSA perspective, from my history in USPSA, but I've been able to do it so far. I'm not really acting on instinct yet on IDPA. I'm telling myself, this is what you're about to do.
Yeah. And then I also crunched the numbers a little bit for across the different classes, and that's a little bit of illumination. The Corsa fire again was 3 strings. It was fire a shot, slide lock, fire a shot. Second string was fire a shot, reload with retention, fire a shot, etc. So until we've got the 3 strings, add the times together. The 7-yard wide open target, some people were down a point, down 2 points. I didn't pay too much attention to separating time from score, because almost the vast majority, I think, of people were down 0 or down 1 or whatever. But anyway, so again, if I averaged out the stage scores for all divisions, but for a given class on this stage, the average for all experts, which was 20 or 30 shooters, was 19.2 seconds.
For all 3 strings.
For all 3 strings. The average for sharpshooters was 22.9 seconds.
Okay.
So if we round those, that's 19 for the experts, 23 for the sharpshooters, so 4 seconds between expert and sharpshooter, and then we're down to marksman is 27.5. So if we do the same rounding there, it's 19 for experts, 23 for sharpshooters, 28 for marksmen. And so there's considerable time to be saved. I mean, practicing your reloads, be good at it. And again, I emphasize on the retention reloads, practice one and be good at that one. I think it makes more sense. Your practice time is always limited, so rather than split it between multiple techniques that are just kind of overlap, and instead
of wasting precious ammunition,
exactly, practice
work on
one
your
and be good at
reloads.
it.
Now, go back to your last match results and find, I don't know, your score for any given stage, and subtract 2 seconds and see where you would have been.
Yeah.
And just think, that's time, that's precious time that you can get back.
Yeah, and IDPA courses of fire are often only, 15 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds. You can knock 2 points off each one of those stages where there's a reload. Yeah, and so the other thing I did, of course, was since I'm shooting a revolver, I looked at some of the revolver reloads too, and there were 4 classified revolver shooters, 3 sharpshooters and a marksman. I was the only shooter shooting enhanced service revolver, and of course, I should have the benefit of clip load, or moon clip loading versus the speed loading used in stock service revolver. Now, the other thing is, one of the reasons that I have it fixed in my head how much faster I should be with clips versus speed loaders is that the speed loaders that I'm familiar with are what we call slow loaders. They're the HKS style, where you try to line it up with the cylinder and then turn the little knob, and then hopefully they fall into the cylinder instead of falling out onto the ground. But this, you're kind of manipulating this kind of fiddly thing. A lot of modern speed loaders, it's almost like they eject the cases into the cylinder.
Got a button right in the middle.
Yeah, spring loaded.
You hit the star and just
it punches the rounds in there, and you can and just let the speed loader fall off. I mean, I find that with the slow loader, the HKS slow loader, I'm fiddling with it, turning the knob, and then very carefully kind of lifting it off the rims to ensure that they fall into the cylinder. I don't pull them back out.
Sure.
Yeah. But I see these guys with these speed loaders that they essentially punch it in there, and then they just kind of let go of it, flick the cylinder closed. And so I was, on the one hand, I was kind of disappointed that my clip load times weren't that much better, or weren't even sometimes as good as guys who apparently are practicing their speed loader reloads. So just to kind of run it down here, myself against the guys in SSR, my emergency reload was 7.42 seconds, and the 3 guys who were shooting in SSR, their times are 7.14, 9.92, and 7.07. So of the 4 of us, I was third, but third by some tenths of a second. But still, if I'm going to get the advantage of shooting ESR and clip loading, I need to be knocking some half a second anyway off that.
Yeah.
So then on the retention reloads, the other interesting thing is there's only 2 retention reloads for revolvers. When you must clear the cylinder before you can reload it, and so the retention reload for the revolver is ejecting out either the clip or whatever live and spent rounds there are. And then again, because the rule book doesn't really cover revolver reloads, you might think, okay, now I've got all these some spent cases, some live rounds that I've just ejected from the cylinder. Well, what do I do with those? You can't very well, put the gun under your arm and pick out the live ones and toss the empties. Right. So the rule, it's not in the rule book, but I think it's either in a rules clarification or in the SO class materials. It says after you've ejected these combination of live and spent rounds into your hand, put the whole mess in your pocket. And so the idea is, don't deal with trying to separate the live ones from the spent ones. Just put all 6 of them in your pocket and then go for your reload. And so whether you're, that's the only way to do it.
Whether it's tactical load or reload with retention.
Right, either way, the spent ones come out of the cylinder. You can't very well handle 6 empty cases and a speed loader at the same time.
You can't bring your speed loader up and then eject the 6 empties into the same hand.
Yeah, so retention reloads with a revolver are always the same. It's always eject the spent ones out, pocket them, get your reload, and reload it. So we essentially, even though for the auto pistols, I asked and got quite a little bit of pushing back from people who were asked to do both the tack load and the reload with retention on the same stage, because of course they're interchangeable. You shouldn't be asked to do both. But everybody pretty much went along. We ended up throwing the stage out of the match results because technically it did not comply with the rules. So we call it, okay, this is going to be the reloading side stage, so Rick can be humored by the results. But again, so with the revolver retention reloads, my 2 retention reloads were 8.24 and 8.3. So very consistent. But now the guys in SSR, 7.89, 8.63, 9.35, 9.42.
That guy was consistent.
Yeah, 8.03, 8.97. So I did do pretty well on my retention reloads. Apparently dropping my moon clip into my holster is quicker than putting the whole mess in your pocket, because I had some pretty decent retention reload times, and I did win the stage. So my combination of reloads and shooting still ruled.
There you go.
23.96 versus 28.16, 28.69, 28.57, which is kind of amazing that the 3 guys in SSR
all wound up in 28 and a half.
Yeah, all were within a half a second of each other. and then I was able to beat him by 4 seconds.
Attaboy.
Yeah. So anyway, but again, you get an idea of just how much slower the revolver reloads are. Instead of 4 seconds, 6 seconds, and 7 seconds, or what kind of our kind of target numbers, it's 8 seconds. 7 to 8 seconds for the slide lock empty cylinder reload, where you're just dumping the brass on the ground, versus 9 low 8s up to 9 or 10 seconds for the retention reload. So practice those reloads, man. I mean, I'm hoping to knock at least half a second off these. I want to be able to beat all these SSR guys at least on my reloading by the time the state championship match rolls around. But again, I think on those retention reloads, be good at one of them. And some other things in the rule book, not really related to the mechanics of reloading the gun, but one of the things that I think is going to make an impact on the sport is the rules are revised in a way that really discourage any kind of reload but a standing flat-footed reload. The rules essentially say you may not advance. Will say when the book takes effect, you may not advance to the next shooting position until you've completed a reload. So for instance, like on the back to the classifier, you're not able to leave that barricade until the gun is loaded, but that now seems to be extended even to a continuous piece of cover. Let's say if you've got a wall, we have these 4 foot by 8 foot wall sections, turn them on their side, and we'll often shoot around both sides of it. Well, we would often, you'd shoot your X number of rounds around the right side, reload as you moved along the wall, so that when you arrived at the other side, you were already reloaded. Well, with this new rule in effect where you can't advance, well, the next array is at the opposite end of the wall. You won't be able to start moving down the wall until after you've completed the reload.
Even though you're behind cover the whole time.
Even though you're behind cover the whole time.
That's interesting. I wonder if they revisit that one. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where you're trying to settle an argument, and this is the way we're going to settle it. You have people that say, let's say I'm at this wall, there's another wall that's 10 yards down range. I should be able to reload as I run from this wall to that wall because all the targets that I'm going to engage are hidden behind that far wall. So technically I'm covered the whole way. Whereas the other school of thought is you're actually exposing yourself between the time you've left the one wall and arrived at the other one.
How do you know those targets, where they're at, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because you're playing a game where you know how many targets there are, and you know where they are, and you know where on the stage you can be, where they can see you and you can't see them, you can find a spot on the range to move and be covered. But if you look at it as a self-defense situation where any targets that have yet to be engaged, you're looking for them and they're looking for you too, I consider that move from wall A to wall B to be running in the open, even though you're not looking at any targets. And whether you agree with me or disagree with me, IDPA has decided what we're going to do to settle this argument is just say you can't move from this spot wherever you are when you commence your reload until the reload is complete. And I'm not sure really how much impact it's going to have. You're running your gun dry anyway. If you run your gun dry in the middle of an array, you're going to reload, shoot, and then move anyway. You're not going to be reloading while you move. If you've run your gun dry and you need to then, if your gun just happens to run dry right before you need to go to another position, you'll have to reload before you go.
Okay.
But I don't know how much real effect that's going to have. I mean, I think, let's say I'm shooting a revolver, there's 3 targets, I go 2, 4, 6. Under the old rules, I couldn't leave until after I'd reloaded because my gun was empty. I couldn't leave cover. You still can't leave cover with an empty gun. So if I'm standing here and the next shooting position is over there, I can't leave until the gun's reloaded anyway. So that hasn't really changed. But what has changed, I think, is this idea that advancing, and there's no sense that your downrange is advancing. Advancing is moving in the direction of the next target array. You can't move until you've completed the reload. That's what's really changed. And we'll see if, when the rule book actually comes out in October, if the language is the same. Now, the other thing that they've added that was, I think, I'm not really sure what the need for it was, if you run dry while you're out in the open, you can initiate the reload before you arrive at cover. And a lot of people, they're saying, it's ridiculous. This is supposed to be representing a simulation of a gunfight. why would I run with an empty gun to cover? Why am I not reloading while I'm moving to cover?
Yeah, right.
And so they've addressed that by saying, if your gun runs dry while you're in the open, you may initiate the reload, but you cannot engage any targets until you arrive at the position that you're advancing to.
Okay.
So that is one of those deals where, again, I'm trying to imagine where it's going to come into play. And where it came into play at the last match I shot was a 3-target array that we engaged while backing up to a barricade. And so the way the rule book is written now, I've got 6 shots fired by the time I've moved about 10 feet, and now it's just a 20-foot run to the barricade. I'm not doing anything. When I arrive at the barricade, then I do my reload. Under the new rule book, as soon as I fired that 6th shot, I can start my reload as I move back to the barricade. So in that sense, for somebody where the course of fire procedure means that you've run out of ammo, you're given this advantage of being able to start your reload right away. But I'm still not sure, other than an array like that, or you're shooting a revolver, there's 3 targets to be engaged, 2 each, you engage them while you're moving to cover. That is about the only situation I can see where it's going to come into play. Because, I mean, you could have a situation where you're engaging 6 targets while moving, 2 each. Everybody's going to run dry before they get to the cover position that they're advancing to. So let's say if you're shooting a revolver, you're going to go 2, 4, 6, start your reload, arrive at cover, and go 2, 4, 6. If you're shooting in CDP, you're going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, initiate your reload, assuming you're still this far from cover, arrive at cover, do a reload, and fire the last 3 shots. And if you're shooting in SSP or ESP, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, arrive at cover, your toes are probably already going to be at the wall, do your reload, and fire the last shot. So that's an array you could put now. There's no more revolver neutrality. It used to be you would have to provide a place essentially for revolvers to reload after every 6 shots. They've gotten rid of revolver neutrality, and now the wrinkle that you now have to have in your stage is you have to have the stage set up in such a way that when somebody arrives at cover, if their gun's empty, they're able to engage the targets that they weren't able to engage while moving. And that's something that we never used to take into account. We just say engage T1, T2, and T3 with 2 rounds each while arriving at cover. You had your chance. You had 6 rounds for an array that required 6 rounds. But once you arrived at cover, that array was done. The cover was cover from the next target. Now the cover that you arrive at not only has to be cover for the next array, but it also has to be cover for the last array. Because, and then depending on how the targets are set up, let's say I'm shooting the revolver and there's 5 targets that I'm supposed to engage 2 each. So I arrived at cover. Well, which 2 targets haven't I engaged yet? If the targets are set up shoulder to shoulder, it could be any one of them. So when I arrive at the cover position, I have to have all 5 targets available to me to engage, because there's no way of guaranteeing which one is the 1 or 2 that hasn't been engaged yet. Now you could do the targets like in a 6 feet apart. Then when I arrive at cover, you know that the one that hasn't been engaged yet is the most distant one, or that one in the next most distant. So then if it is, let's say, a 4 or 5 or 6 target array, you could say, I'm going to put the 2 back here to ensure
tactical priority.
Yeah, it ensures that when everybody arrives at cover, it's those 2 targets that are yet to be engaged. And that way,
otherwise, some people go right to left, some will go left to right.
Exactly. So it makes it a little more difficult to set up the targets in such a way that when I arrive at cover, they are still available to me, but then also that everybody knows which one it is, especially the guy who needs to keep shooting, which are the ones that haven't been engaged yet. So that'll be kind of interesting how that plays out, this reloading when you run dry in the open. I just don't think there's going to be that many opportunities to do it. But again, if you've got an 18-round course of fire, you could literally have a course of fire where you've got cover here, and 9 targets lined up in between. And engage them, and engage in tactical priority. Well, when you run dry, you arrive at cover and engage the ones you haven't engaged yet. It doesn't make much sense as a course of fire, but you can do that now because you'll be able to, or be allowed to, engage the targets at the cover position that you weren't able to account for on the move when you ran dry. And that's something that you just weren't. We didn't have to worry about it, and now we do. So. That's about the extent of the reload deal. If you have any questions, hey, here's the situation I was in. What reload am I supposed to do? Send us a question. We enjoy it. I can tell you that when I did my speed reload You know where that clip went? Right into the holster. Yeah. Yeah. So, so send us emails, or you can go to the website, powerfactorshow.com, send us an email, powerfactorshow@gmail.com, or what's the Facebook?
You can find our facebook.com/powerfactorshow. Like us on Facebook.
Yeah, please do. So we're going to do a little IDPA rules trivia. There's a requirement within a course of fire that you not exceed a certain maximum distance, and that the distance between any two positions on the course of fire cannot exceed a maximum. So the question is, what is the maximum distance on an IDPA course of fire between two positions, any two positions, and what's the maximum amount of movement allowed, legally allowed on a course of fire? So I want both numbers.
And this is from the current rule book.
Current 2005 rule book. Yep. Yeah, they maybe are going to change here soon, but as the rules currently exist here in the NMA, what's the answer? Get them both.
And that's available on IDPA.com?
Yep. Go to the website if you're not already a member.
Right.
Scroll through there, find it. Should be pretty easy. But get those answers in ASAP. Don't send it in next Tuesday and think you're going to get in on it.
Right. You got 1 week to get the answer into the email address.
Which is, nice segue.
Thanks. powerfactorshow@gmail.com.
Yeah. And after you've found the answer and got it right, and you're feeling good about yourself and the show, then you can like us on Facebook. That's kind of a weak transition, but
Facebook.com/powerfactorshow.
And
if you find it in your heart, you like the show, donate. Go to our website, powerfactorshow.com. The show's free. It's always going to be free.
Yeah.
We do spend some time and money to deliver you the content. Hopefully you get something out of it. And we appreciate everybody watching. We get a lot of great comments and questions, and we really appreciate all the viewers out there. So
until next time, I'm Rick.
I'm Larry.
Have a good day.
See you next week.